He came on an autumn afternoon, bringing a contract and a gaze no one could tell was real or false. She signed her name to save her father, to keep the house, and to survive in a world where kindness had no worth. But behind every binding clause, she discovered a crack in his cold shell, and also a crack in her own heart. They did not choose each other out of love, but because there was no other choice. Yet amid that darkness, 3 tiny heartbeats had begun to echo, the beginning of a story no one dared believe was real. Some houses don't collapse because of time, but because hope isn't strong enough to stand against numbers. The Park family's 3rd-floor apartment sat in a red brick complex on the outskirts of New Jersey, where autumn sunlight was nothing more than a faint streak pushing through cheap plastic blinds. Emily Park sat on the living room floor, hands stained with oil paint, eyes fixed on the eviction notice resting on the wobbly dining table with a broken leg. She didn't need to read closely to understand. Only 72 hours left. After that, everything, from the unfinished canvases to the teacup her mother once used every morning, would belong to the bank. Her father, Michael Park, had once been a skilled construction engineer and co-founder of a contracting company with his college friend, Terry Malone. Together, they built real hospitals, schools, and structures, with people living inside. But trust doesn't come with receipts, and Terry knew that well. 6 months earlier, he vanished with $3 million in advance payment for a children's hospital expansion project, a contract funded by Whitmore Industries. And of course, all legal responsibility fell on Michael, the one whose name was on the deal. Now he sat in the kitchen, staring into a glass of water, as though sheer will might turn it into whiskey. He had sold his car, his collection of model ships, and even Emily's mother's wedding ring. The only thing he kept was his daughter's brushes and paints, not because he thought art would save them, but because he knew that when everything else collapsed, Emily's hands were the only place beauty could still be made. The doorbell rang at 6:47 p.m. Not hurried, not rushed, but deliberate, like a warning in sound. Emily wiped her hands on her worn jeans and went to answer. Through the gap, she saw a sleek black Bugatti parked out front, far too extravagant for a neighborhood of broken cameras and rusted mailboxes. 2 men in suits stood outside, definitely not insurance salespeople. Her father had risen, trembling slightly. "Emily," he said, voice rough like sandpaper. "Someone wants to see you." The man stepped inside as though no invitation was required. Julian Whitmore, 38, CEO of Whitmore Pharmaceuticals, with a face carved for the cover of a finance magazine. Sharp nose, silver-gray eyes like untempered steel, and a perfectly tailored dark gray suit. But what made Emily step back wasn't his looks or presence, the stillness, not calm. The silence of someone used to making life or death decisions in a boardroom and carrying that habit everywhere. "Miss Park," he said, voice deep, precise, absolutely controlled, "I am Julian Whitmore." "I know," Emily replied, straightening her spine as if that might grant her a few extra inches. "You're here to repossess my home." His gaze flickered, not surprise, but approval. "I came to offer an alternative." Michael turned his face away, shame written plainly. "Julian has proposed." Julian never took his eyes off Emily. Park and Malone signed a $50 million contract with Whitmore Industries. When Mr. Malone embezzled, the hospital project collapsed. "By law, your family bears full liability, plus penalties and interest." "We know," Emily cut in, her voice harder than expected. "What do you want?" "I don't have 50 million. "No. But I do." He stepped closer. "And I will erase the entire debt if you agree to one condition." The room seemed to hold its breath. "You will marry me." For 2 years. Silence stretched. Then Michael sank into a chair, as if his heart couldn't withstand another blow. Emily stared straight at Julian. "You're insane." "No. I'm practical." He said it as though it were a quality superior to kindness. "You have all the money in the world. Why would you need a wife?" "To keep control of Whitmore Industries. My grandfather's will requires me to marry before I am 40. If not, full control shifts to the shareholders. I have 11 months. "And me?" she asked, bitterly. "Just a tool to trigger a clause?" "You're the one I chose because you understand damage," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to the painting on the wall, a family fractured in fading light. "And maybe, healing." Emily clenched her hands. "I need time. You have 30 seconds. You can't force me. Otherwise, I'll move to Plan B. Lawsuits, criminal charges against Mr. Park for breach of contract. Everything shatters. Finances, reputation, health. I don't bluff." Her father groaned as though struck in the gut. She looked at him, then back at Julian. In those steel-grey eyes, she saw not only pressure, but solitude. The kind of loneliness that makes a person vanish under the spotlight without anyone remembering. "Fine," she said. "But I have conditions." His brow lifted slightly. "State them." "I still paint full creative freedom. I won't play the doll wife at business galas unless I choose to. And after 2 years, it ends. No ties, no residue." "Agreed." He handed over a folder. "My lawyer already prepared the contract." She skimmed no hidden traps. There was even a clause protecting her in case of divorce or death. He passed her a pen. It was heavy, cold, and worth more than anything she'd ever owned. When she signed, Julian spoke, voice low. "One more thing, Miss Park." "What?" "You belong to me for the next 2 years. Not as property," he added quickly when her face darkened, "but as family. I protect family, even from myself." The words should have frightened her, but instead, they left a strange warmth hollowing her chest, as though she hadn't just signed a contract, but stepped into an unfinished canvas. Weddings in castles usually have 2 kinds of light: the glow of chandeliers and the flash of cameras, both blinding, neither warm enough to comfort those inside. That day, New York was wrapped in a pale mist, and fog draped across Whitmore Estate like a velvet curtain. Emily Park stood in a dressing room the size of a 2-bedroom apartment, wearing a $20,000 gown. Satin clung to her body like a false promise. She looked into the mirror and didn't recognize herself. "You're not the woman in the picture," Jasmine Cho whispered, bending down to fix the hem. Jasmine had been Emily's best friend since art school, now a freelance painter, and the only one brave enough to stand by her today. "The problem is, the woman in the picture looks happy," Emily replied, exhaling sharply. "We can leave. Right now. My car's 100 meters away. You could be in Mexico in 12 hours. Jas, stop. I signed. I can't abandon my father again." Jasmine squeezed her hand. "Then at least, don't let them think you're a doll." Emily nodded, then turned back to the mirror. "Not a doll. I'm a living illustration of an investment dream." From the tall window, she looked down at the rose garden where the ceremony was set. 200 guests, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon in D, chairs draped in white chiffon, roses flown in from Holland. The still perfection suffocated her. Everyone down there believed this was love, the fateful meeting between a cold billionaire and a poor artist, a romance splashed across financial magazines and tabloids alike. The artist princess and the pharmaceutical prince, they called it. If only they knew. A soft knock. A black man, mid-30s, in a charcoal-grey suit stepped in. "Excuse me, I'm Damien Knox, Mr. Whitmore's executive aide." "Just say Julian," Jasmine muttered, unimpressed by the royal formality. Knox smiled politely. "It's time, Miss Park." Emily nodded, her chest trembling not from fear, but from the weight of stepping into 2 years with a man she couldn't understand. She followed Knox down the marble corridor, each step carrying her closer to a performance she hadn't rehearsed for. Below, Julian Whitmore stood in a perfectly cut black tuxedo at the altar. No hat, no smile, no expression. But from Emily's angle, she caught his left hand, tightened slightly when he saw her appear just a fraction. Like instinct, the guests rose. Music swelled. Emily walked forward, legs unsteady. She felt the gaze of 200 eyes piercing through the layers of the veil. No one knew, except her and Julian, that everything here was a prop in a play. Julian looked at her. He didn't smile, but his eyes weren't cold. Not entirely. The officiant, Judge Morrison, a longtime Whitmore family friend, began the vows. Familiar words about love, care, and fidelity. They sounded like a joke when both knew this was not a matter of the heart. Julian Octavius Whitmore, the judge called. Do you take? I do, Julian interrupted, without hesitation. His voice was clear, steady, holding nothing back. I promise, he continued, eyes locked on Emily, to protect, care for, and honor the agreement signed. I, Emily Park, she answered, her voice trembling but unbroken. Take Julian Octavius Whitmore as my husband. I will respect the agreement. And, she faltered. Something lodged in her throat. Then she looked into his eyes, grey, cold, unreadable, and whispered, and tried to understand the man behind the contract. The guests applauded softly, thinking it a creative vow. But only Julian knew those words weren't in the script. He looked at her, startled instantly, then masked it with a stiff smile. Perhaps he missed a beat for the first time in his life. The kiss unfolded like a cinematic shot. His hand cupped her cheek, surprisingly gentle, never forceful. Their lips met just long enough for the photographer to capture it, but not so long that it could be mistaken as real. And yet, when his thumb brushed her cheekbone, Emily felt something like sunlight leaking through a winter window, faint, but not fake. The reception in the grand hall played out like every elite wedding. Champagne, live jazz piano, and blessings from strangers. Julian always kept his hand at the small of her back, moving like a CEO among shareholders, courteous, precise, but never too close. I don't drink, Emily murmured after being offered a fourth glass. That's fine. Neither do I, Julian replied, smoothly taking her glass and setting it aside. You don't drink at your own wedding? Not drunk until I know who's real, he said, low. Emily studied him. So, who's the realest person in this room? Julian didn't answer, but his hand lingered at her waist, not withdrawing. A platinum blonde woman approached, wearing a diamond necklace large enough to be a weapon. Julian, darling. Finally, I meet the mysterious bride. Emily smiled politely. A pleasure to meet you. Charlotte Devereux, Julian supplied flatly. This is Emily. Ah, Emily. Charlotte stressed the name as though tasting something foreign. Julian told me about you. An artist, yes? Honestly, such unusual taste. Emily stayed composed. I believe people view art through their own moods. Charlotte chuckled. Oh, perhaps. But some people shouldn't view art through emotion, especially when they don't even know what they're painting. Julian's hand tightened slightly on Emily's waist, a warning. But Emily only tilted her head and smiled. Maybe. But sometimes, only those broken understand how deep healing can go. Charlotte slipped away into the crowd, like a poison draft no one wanted twice. By the time the last guest left, Emily felt like she'd run a marathon powered by smiles. Julian led her toward the East Wing. Your room is in the East Wing. Damien will show you. She paused. And you? I'm in the West. We'll see each other rarely, unless necessary. Fine. She nodded, showing no disappointment. But as she walked away, she heard his voice, barely audible. If you need anything, just ask. You're mine for 2 years. My responsibility is to protect. She turned, but Julian was already gone. Her room was nearly the size of a small-town library. A king-sized bed draped in white silk, warm golden light, and a single rose placed on the pillow. Whether a genuine gesture or a tease, she couldn't tell. When Damien shut the door, leaving her alone, Emily walked to the window. She looked down at the garden where she had just vowed, where that man had just kissed her for reasons that had nothing to do with love. Her phone buzzed softly, an unknown number. Hope you're comfortable. Sleep well. Jay. Emily stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, thank you for the studio. And the rose. The reply came in under 5 seconds. You're welcome. Tomorrow, we begin learning how to live with our choice. Emily set the phone down and curled under the sheets. From the window, the garden lights flickered into the night like unanswered question marks. She woke at 5:12 a.m. with a strange emptiness, as if her body was still lying on silk sheets, but her mind drifted somewhere between memory fragments and this unfamiliar space. Emily Park opened her eyes to a ceiling over 3 meters high, painted ivory white. white to the point of coldness. Nothing in this room belonged to her, except the hazy dream from last night, where a man's voice whispered something she couldn't understand. She slipped on a robe and stepped out of the bedroom. The hallway was long and silent, like a museum after closing hours. Morning light streamed through the east-facing windows, brushing against the Italian stone floor. Each tile probably worth a week's commission, if she ever managed to sell to a magazine. But in an instant, all the glamour blurred when she entered the last room down the hall, where the light struck straight into her soul. The studio. She hadn't thought Julian would keep his word, but he had. Not a showroom gallery, but a true artist's space. Vast, high-ceilinged, with perfect, north-facing windows, equipped with every tool she'd ever dreamed of. A walnut easel, adjustable lighting, a long white shelf lined with Kolinsky sable brushes, the legendary kind only elite artists ever touched. They were arranged neatly, their tips smooth as flowing water, and on the table, a note. For catching light in the dark. J. Emily couldn't tell what made her hand tremble. Emotion, suspicion, or the fear that someone had touched a part of her she hadn't allowed. She opened the box of brushes, stroking the bristles gently. They felt soft, alive, like a breathing thing. The next day, she woke early again. Not from unease, but anticipation. This time, on the table lay a set of rare pigments. Ultramarine from genuine lapis lazuli, vermilion from cinnabar, with notes detailing the historical origins of each shade. Someone had gone to the trouble not just to gift them, but to understand. On the third day, a stack of books, The Wounded Artist, Trauma and the Creative Mind, and Color as Memory. Dense academic texts, yet also like indirect diaries of people who painted to keep themselves from shattering. On the fourth day, a letter. No, not a letter. A photocopy from an old journal, the handwriting acceptable, slanted, even. She opened the first page, dated 1984. Julian painted today, for the first time with real brushes. His hands are so tiny, but they moved so carefully. He said, "Paint something happy so Mommy won't be sad in her eyes." My heart melted. Emily read 3 pages straight, her vision blurring without her noticing. Later entries spoke of a boy who loved nightly painting, mixing colors after the lights were out, quietly trying to heal adults with his clumsy drawings. "I have to leave tomorrow. Frederick has given an ultimatum. I can't take Julian with me. Perhaps hatred will be easier than him knowing I was forced." She folded the page, her chest heavy. Julian's mother had been someone like her, an artist. She had left behind brushes as her last whispered language. And yet that child, Julian, had lived over 30 years feeling abandoned. That evening, Emily sought him out for the first time since the wedding. Julian was in his West Wing office, the massive screens glowing with European market data, but he wasn't really watching. His eyes were vacant, as if staring at a film he'd seen 100 times and still couldn't understand the ending. "Thank you," Emily said from the doorway. Julian turned, startled. For what? The brushes, the pigments, the journal, the studio. He tilted his head slightly, voice slow. "You read about my mother?" "I read it all. She didn't leave because she wanted to." Julian's face tightened for a fraction of a second. His hand pressed against the desk, steadying himself. "She left. That's the truth. She was forced. That's also the truth." He was silent for a long time. Then, almost like an exhale, "You don't know where this will take me, Emily. Then show me." "No." He stood abruptly. "I won't drag you into it. Julian, you showed me you once painted. You were a boy who wanted to heal people with color. Do you think I can't understand that?" "You don't understand," he snapped, eyes flashing angrily. "You see the surface. You think you've seen me, but I'm not that boy anymore." "So what? I don't feel anything." "Nonsense." "Ha," he laughed, dry and hollow. "I haven't felt anything since I was 10, since my grandfather killed the dog I loved most, to teach me that every weakness is a liability." Emily froze, not at the cruelty, but at how he said it without his voice breaking. "You still feel, Julian. I see it in the way you chose the brushes and the books. In every nameless gift you left behind. You call those feelings? No. I call it someone trying to remember who they used to be. The silence between them thickened, like smoke. Neither moved. Both stood locked in place, as if playing a chess game where neither knew which move opened the match. Then Julian spoke, so quietly she had to strain to hear. You want to see the real me? She nodded. Then, tomorrow, take me into the studio. Show me what you see. Emily only managed another nod before he turned away. Not in anger, but as if after revealing his true face for a few seconds, he needed to retreat into the dark to steady himself. People often think a fracture begins with a sharp blow, but most of the time, it starts quietly, a faint tremor, a nearly invisible fissure on a surface that seemed flawless. All it takes is light hitting at the right angle, and the truth reveals itself. Julian Whitmore stood in the studio at 6 a.m., hands clasped behind his back, eyes moving across each canvas as though reading classified files. Emily lingered at the doorway, observing him not with her eyes but with instinct. She knew his first reaction wouldn't be praise or emotion. It would be a defense. That one. She stepped closer, pointing at the largest portrait. Julian sitting in silence, broken shapes looming behind him, light bleeding around like spilled blood. I painted it the night after reading your mother's journal. He said nothing, but his shoulders tightened slightly. Do you see anything? She asked. You look at me as if I were a literary character. No, I look at you as if you were human. He moved closer to the painting. You painted my eyes looking outward, but I see nothing. Because I think, you don't look at the world. You look at your own shadow. Julian turned to her, face unreadable. You believe you understand me that much? Emily didn't step back. I believe I'm trying. Silence stretched taut between them, but this time it carried no hostility. Only a nameless air between two people not yet defined. You shouldn't paint me, he said slowly. Why not? Because you're creating something I can't control. Emily froze, not at the words, but at his tone. It wasn't cold, it was anxious. You're afraid? Julian gave a short laugh, hollow as pebbles rattling in a dry well. I don't have time for fear. You have time to build walls. Then you have time to learn how to breathe. She turned away, but not before catching a flicker in his eyes. Not anger, woundedness. That evening, Emily received a message. I have an hour free. Meet me in the library? She went, unsure if it was curiosity or something closer to concern. Julian stood by a mahogany bookshelf, holding a stack of documents. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, sleeves rolled like he'd escaped a marathon meeting. But when he saw her, he set the papers aside. Do you want me to be honest? He asked, without circling. Always. You make me uncomfortable. Emily tilted her head. Because I paint you. Because you see me, and I'm not ready to be seen. For once, Emily had no immediate reply. She stepped beside him, eyes on a canvas hanging nearby, an abstract blend of grays and gold, like scars of light. Have you ever thought, maybe none of us are ready to be seen? She asked. He didn't answer, but she heard his breath, long, heavy. Do you know, he said at last, my mother painted me hundreds of times, but I couldn't keep a single portrait. Emily turned. Why? Because I hated the image of a child who believed in something that wasn't real. But that child still lives in you. He's the reason you gave me fine brushes. You know the brightest light comes from the north. The reason you chose books most people wouldn't touch. He looked at her, this time, without deflection. And if I said I want to paint again, not with hands, but with living through emotions? Emily stayed quiet. It was the first time Julian admitted wanting to return. Then where do we start? She asked. You lead. 2 days later, they met again, unplanned, in the library. He was hunched over an urgent report, dark circles under his eyes and a cold coffee on his side. You haven't slept? She asked. The Shanghai branch is in crisis. A drug was just pulled from circulation. Why? A child died during clinical trials. Not directly our fault, but we funded it. Emily stepped closer. She saw it clearly in his eyes. Silent collapse. Julian. He set the cup down. Do you think I'm a murderer? No. Why not? Because you're asking yourself that question, and real murderers don't stay awake to wonder. He dropped his head into his hand, as if exhaustion finally outweighed pride. How do I atone? He asked. Emily didn't answer right away. She only placed her hand gently on his shoulder, by not running, and by not being alone in the pain. That evening, Emily returned to the studio. On the easel stood an unfinished canvas, Julian's face, but this time she painted his eyes looking toward her, not distant, not defeated, but focused, as though trying to trust for the first time. She stood before it for a long time, then slipped a note into the corner of the canvas. If you want, I can help you finish this, but only if you're willing to add a brushstroke. She didn't wait for a reply, but the next morning, in the paint box beside the easel, there was a new tube of pigment brick red, the color of walls that had burned but not fallen. Langston Gallery sat in the middle of Manhattan like a clean incision on the city's skin, cold, white, and so expensive even the air seemed arrogant. On opening night, the light struck each painting as if dissecting the soul of its maker, or perhaps the soul of its subject. Emily stood in the far corner, holding a glass of water, while guests drifted past the canvases as though browsing wine. Strangers in fur hats muttered marvelous in monotone. The wealthy bought quickly, swiped their cards without glancing at the price, then walked away. But the discerning, those who looked long enough, always stopped at the most significant piece. Fragment 47, Julian, a man's face. Not perfect, not idealized, grey eyes wide open, not looking straight but slightly askew, as though caught under a spotlight in memory. Around him, layers of color like broken bricks, fractured concrete, pale yellow light slipping through cracks, not to illuminate, but to expose. No caption was needed. Anyone who read the papers knew. Julian Whitmore, the multi-million-dollar CEO, her husband, the man who once declared to cameras, "Every choice I've ever made comes from logic, not emotion." And tonight, he was art. "Oh my God, you've just set the press on fire," whispered Helena Morrison, Langston's curator, eyes sparkling. The entire collection sold out in the first 40 minutes of preview. Half of them didn't even bother reading your bio. Emily smirked faintly. Good. I need the money. I still have 3 student loans and an unpaid mortgage of the heart. Does he know yet? Helena asked, eyes narrowing. No, I didn't invite him. Helena looked at her, half pity, half admiration. Reckless, but brave. No, Emily exhaled, just tired of pretending. She hadn't finished when the glass doors at the front swung open, and silence rippled through the room like a held breath. Julian walked in, black tuxedo, grey silk tie, hair combed immaculately, but his eyes, not like before, not guarded, not cold, not controlled, but like a storm gathering, quiet before breaking. Emily straightened, her hand clenching the glass so tightly it nearly cracked. Julian didn't go to her at once. He walked the gallery, pausing at fragment 23. Mask, where a man's face split in two by shadow and light. Then he stopped the longest, before 47. She couldn't read his gaze. Shock, pain, betrayal. At last, he turned, walked straight to her. No greeting. "You didn't tell me," he said, voice low but carrying enough for nearby guests to hear. "No." "Why?" "Because if I did, you'd stop me." "Because I have the right." His voice quivered faintly. "Because you're showing a part of me I never agreed to let anyone see. You're my husband, not some anonymous client." "Husband?" He gave a short laugh. "We had an agreement, Emily. No emotions, no bonds. You're breaking the boundary." "No," she said, gaze unflinching. "I'm redrawing it. Because you crossed it long ago. You just refused to admit it." A woman's voice cut through the air behind them, sharp as a blade. "Julian, darling, it's been too long." Emily didn't need to turn. She knew. Charlotte Devereux, pale blue silk dress, platinum hair swept high, makeup so light it seemed invisible, glided forward like a swan aware the lake belonged to her. "She's bold," Charlotte said, eyes skimming the canvas. "I don't recall you ever agreeing to a portrait this emotionally naked." "Charlotte," Julian said, voice sharp, This isn't the time. Oh, I think it's perfect, she said, then turned to Emily. Impressive. You caught that look. The moment he was weakest. Emily met her gaze squarely. Emotion isn't weakness. Charlotte chuckled softly. You're wrong. Emotion is a tool. Whoever controls another's emotions controls power. Do you think you love him, or that he loves you? Julian stiffened. Emily stood her ground. I don't think. I see. I feel. I paint. And I don't need your permission to do it. Charlotte stepped closer, murmuring, So when your marriage contract ends, what will you paint? A man's back as he walks away, or a man who never turned around at all? Emily didn't answer, but Julian did. Enough. His voice rolled through the room. Heads turned. You will not speak to my wife like that. Charlotte froze. Well, well, she said, smiling thinly. So, she's made you call her wife for real? No. She made me name what I feared most, and stay anyway. Julian turned to Emily, voice softer. You may expose every part of me, even the ones I'm not ready for, because if anyone has that right, it's you. Emily felt something crack open, not between them, but within him. For the first time, he wasn't trying to control, wasn't trying to win. He was letting himself lose, and accept it. The night closed with tentative applause, then swelling cheers after Emily's short speech, not about Julian, but about art, about pain, and the right of every soul to tell its truth. Julian didn't leave early. He stayed beside her, answered the press, but never let go of her hand. When they stepped outside, Manhattan's streetlights poured over them like a stage curtain falling. Thank you for not running, Emily said. Julian looked at her. I've run enough in my life, he said. Now I just want to stand still, even if I'm painted in colors I don't recognize. On the ride home, neither spoke, but their hands stayed intertwined. And for the first time, no one checked the clock. Sex is not an event, it is a language. And for people too accustomed to using silence as armor, relearning how to touch someone with trust is an entirely foreign tongue. They returned to Whitmore Estate close to midnight. Rain had begun to fall, thin, steady, not loud, but enough to blur the car windows and the city's sounds outside. On the drive home, no music played, no words spoken, but their hands remained clasped. Emily expected him to take her to the East Wing as usual. Instead, Julian pulled her gently toward the west, where he lived, where she had not stepped since the wedding. The oak door opened, the scent of wood, paper, and ink rising to meet her. His room wasn't as cold as she had imagined. Minimalist, nothing wasted, nothing excessive. Yet a small wooden frame stood on the desk. She walked closer, a photo of a boy, maybe 4, scribbling with crayons. Beside him, a young woman with long black hair smiled softly, her eyes so uncannily like Emily's that it startled her. My mother, Julian said behind her. Emily turned. He had removed his jacket, opened his shirt, and opened 2 buttons, and his hair was mussed from his hand. You don't have to. No. He cut her off, quiet but firm. Tonight, I don't want to run anymore. Silence stretched a beat. Then he stepped forward and touched her cheek lightly. Emily. Yes? I don't know how to do this like normal people. Then do it like you. She smiled faintly, placing her hand over his. As long as it's real. He nodded, then leaned down. The first kiss wasn't a plunge. It was hesitation, inquiry, almost listening. His lips brushed hers, then drew back, as if to ask, Is this okay? And she answered by leaning in, closing the space herself. The second kiss was deeper. His hand cupped the back of her neck, not forcing, but holding, as if afraid she might vanish. The room dimmed, night pressing long shadows across the walls. They didn't speak as clothes fell. No urgency, no choreography. Only the slow discovery of 2 bodies unused to being touched by trust. Julian was steady, almost reverent, not the cold control of the boardroom, but the caution of someone who had been broken, unwilling to pass that fracture on. When his hand traced her spine, Emily shivered, not from desire alone, but because, for the first time, her skin registered not just touch, but a wordless request for permission. "I don't deserve you," he whispered between breaths. "You don't have to deserve. You have to be here." After, they lay together in the dark. Emily curled against his chest, her head resting on his shoulder as though it had always belonged there. Julian didn't sleep right away. She felt his eyes fixed on the ceiling, unblinking. "Have you ever loved before?" she asked, softly. He was silent for a while. "Once, long ago. But not enough to make me stay." "And now?" He turned to her, saying nothing, but his hand tightened around hers, this time not for control, but as if, without that grip, he might drift back into a nameless void. They woke together for the first time. Morning light streamed through the curtains, tender, as if tuned especially for this canvas. Julian had risen earlier, brewing coffee. Emily emerged wrapped in a blanket, hair tousled, eyes half dreaming. "Good morning," he said, handing her a cup. "No sugar. You like it that way, don't you?" She blinked, surprised. "How do you know?" He shrugged. "I watch." They sat by the window, rain trailing across the garden. Few words, but every glance a confirmation. Last night was not a dream. That afternoon, Emily returned to fragment 47, but this time, she erased the blurred light. She painted a new stroke in its place, a line flowing from Julian's eye. Not a tear, a streak of orange-red, the color of sunrise. She titled the painting, "First Light," not the day's first light, but the first light of a man relearning he was worthy of love. Morning light slipped through the curtains of the West Wing bedroom, where Julian had risen before Emily. The night's rain still drummed lightly on the estate roof, a reminder that peace hadn't settled. He lay there, staring at the tall ceiling, throat dry, mind circling back to his mother's journal, to the words she'd written when she left, forced away, not gone by choice. Emily was in the dining room making coffee, the steady hum of the machine breaking the hush. Julian stepped out, his expression not relatively calm, but softer, the weariness of a man carrying too many secrets. "I have work today I can't ignore," Julian said, voice unsteady, as though testing the feeling of telling the truth to someone else. Emily pursed her lips. "What is it?" "Charlotte sent me an email." He swallowed. "Evidence that Frederick, my father, didn't die the way everyone thinks." Emily set down her cup. Her stomach clenched tight. "You mean, he's alive?" Julian nodded. "Yes. Photos near a villa in Street Kitts and Nevis. Bank accounts still active, his name in strange transfers. Charlotte claims she has copies of contracts, property records, proof his death was staged." Emily's pulse quickened. "Why didn't you know?" "Why didn't I know?" Julian turned to the window, where dawn bled through rain. "I think I did know, but I didn't dare believe. My father staged everything perfectly. I'm convinced my mother's death, the car, the crash, was orchestrated too, to preserve his grip on power." Emily stepped closer, her hand brushing his back. "We can expose him. Together." He turned, eyes red-rimmed. "Will you still matter if the truth comes out? If Whitmore is just the shell of crimes?" She met his gaze, eyes once cold, now softened, fierce. "You matter. Your feelings matter. Your truth matters. Let me see you as more than the mask the world painted." Julian shook his head faintly, then looked at her deeply, afraid. The words slipped out like a confession he had never allowed himself before. Emily wrapped him in her arms, just held him. Her embrace said what she didn't voice. "You won't be alone." That afternoon, Julian called Charlotte. They met at a small cafe on a lower Manhattan street, public enough for safety, private enough for honesty. Emily went with him. Charlotte was already there, poised, as if she had expected it, light dress, sleek hair, eyes sharp with calculation. "Julian," Charlotte began, smooth but firm, "what do you gain by digging into the past? What will you do with the truth?" Julian drew a slow breath. "Truth isn't meant to be hidden." Charlotte's lips curled. "So what then? Declare war? Drag everything into the light? Do you imagine the press will crown you a hero? The headline will scream that the Whitmore heir's wife, the rising artist, uncovered her father-in-law's staged death. Are you ready to pay that price?" Emily leaned in. We are. Charlotte glanced at Emily, then back at Julian. Do you think it'll be simple? Happiness, family, the Whitmore Foundation, all of it built on a foundation soaked in the dead. Julian let out a bitter laugh. You think I don't know? I felt it in every drop of sweat, in every contract I've signed. I've lived under his shadow all my life. Charlotte lowered her eyes. All I want are Whitmore's assets, not feelings. But if you want to play hero and be away from Whitmore Industries' mask, you'll fight more than your father. You'll be fighting a legacy. Emily's voice cut through, steady. Then I choose a legacy of love. I choose truth, no matter the pain. That evening, Julian stayed late in his private office. A cramped room stacked with documents, flooded with messages from lawyers, shareholders, reporters. Emily found him slumped at the desk, lamplight carving shadows across his weary face. What do you see in here? She asked, touching the deadly contract Charlotte had handed over. Julian looked up, his voice faint. I'm afraid this legacy will destroy everything good I've tried to build. Not just the company, but the man I want to become. Emily took his hand. I don't want others to choose who you are. I want you to choose yourself, truth, love, the man you want to be. He studied her, eyes glistening with tears he hadn't let fall. Then, with new resolve, tomorrow, we'll need stronger evidence. Bank records, video, witnesses. I can't move until there's no doubt left. Emily nodded. I'll help. I'll paint truth. I won't let your mother's pain be buried under his false death. Julian pulled her into his arms. In that embrace lay pain, fatigue, and choice. His choice to stop running. Outside, the rain thickened, like invisible tears. Emily leaned into his shoulder, breathing in rain and wood. She thought of his mother, of the boy who painted at night to stop her from crying. She thought of Julian now, imperfect, but fighting. And she knew the secret had risen not to ruin them, but to clear a path for what was real, love, pain, and the future they had not dared believe in. Some places don't exist on maps, not because they aren't real, but because what happens there isn't allowed to appear in history. Dockside Terminal 42, deep inside the Brooklyn Navy Yard redevelopment zone, was one such place. That night, Emily wore a heavy coat and a micro-recorder pinned beneath the lapel, courtesy of Agent Noah Grayson. Julian had his Rolex modified, a hidden mic inside, a camera wired into his contact lens. They sat in an armored SUV less than 100 meters from the warehouse. You're sure? Julian asked for the third time. Emily nodded. We've come this far. No turning back. Noah's voice came through the earpiece. Once inside, maintain the spacing we rehearsed. They'll check. We need a clear statement, confession, plans, and financial structure. One sentence is enough, and I'll give the order to move in. Julian gave Emily one last look. If there's danger, I don't run, she cut in. Unless you run too. He gave a dry laugh. Stubborn. I learned from you. The SUV doors opened. Cold rain fell across their shoulders. Together, they stepped into the dark. Inside, the warehouse stretched wide, its high ceiling echoing, industrial lights glaring against oil-stained concrete. A long table sat in the center, 6 people around it. At the head, Frederick Whitmore Sr., the man the world believed had been dead for over a decade. He sat upright, silver-haired, eyes like frozen glass, a blackwood cane in hand. On his right, Charlotte Devereaux, in a fitted dress, smiling as if this were an art auction. On his left, 2 executives from major pharmaceutical firms, faces unfamiliar, eyes all too familiar, ruthless, calculating. Frederick lifted his chin. Julian, at last, and you brought your little muse. Emily's voice was steady. I'm no one's muse anymore. But you were a tool, Frederick smirked, tapping the table. And I always know how to use tools. Julian said nothing, dragging out a chair and sitting opposite his grandfather. Emily sat beside him. Frederick nodded. Straight to business. All this justice theater of yours, charity funds, internal investigations, drug price transparency, ends now. You're strangling the child I created. You built Whitmore on blood, Julian said. And you water it with tears. Frederick shot back. Don't be naive. The market has no morality. Then I'll walk, Julian said, and I'll drag every shred of evidence with me. Charlotte leaned in, voice like a blade whispered across bone. If you do, Emily will pay first. Julian turned sharply. You're threatening my wife? Charlotte smiled faintly. Not a threat, a notice. Frederick chuckled. You think love is a shield? No, it's a weakness. From this moment, divorce. Sign the company back over, or we release the African drug trial file with your name on it. Julian shot to his feet. I never signed it. Frederick narrowed his eyes. You don't remember, but the signature is yours. During exhaustion, sedated. Enough for a courtroom not to hesitate. Beneath the table, Emily squeezed his hand. There's another way. Julian looked at her, the look of someone about to make a life or death choice. Then he faced Frederick head-on. I have a counteroffer. Frederick's brows rose. In your files, I'll bet you don't have the 2019 addendum. I diverted part of Whitmore's assets into an independent trust, legally separate. If I sign away control now, everything freezes and detonates simultaneously. The press, the SEC, Congress. Is that what you want? Frederick's grip on his cane tightened. Charlotte flicked her gaze toward the other two men. They gave the slightest nod, a signal of slipping control. Julian stepped into the center of the room. I learned empire from you, but I learned love from my mother, and I choose her. Frederick stilled. For one suspended moment, only the sound of wind whistling through the warehouse roof filled the silence. Charlotte's hand slipped into her purse, fingers curling around a gun, but Noah Grayson emerged from the shadows. FBI, drop the weapon. You're surrounded. Flashlights blazed. Agents poured in from all sides. Frederick did not move. You win this round. But wars don't end with one arrest. Julian looked at him, not with hate, but with sorrow. Wars end when the warmonger is no longer believed. Cuffs locked around Frederick's wrists. Charlotte resisted, but was dragged down. The others were taken too. Emily crossed to Julian, who stood in the warehouse's center. Rain from the leaking roof pattered onto his shoulders, but he didn't feel cold. We did it, she whispered. Julian turned to her, and for the first time, he wept. Not from fear, not from pain, but from relief. 6 weeks after the raid at Terminal 42, Emily Park woke to the familiar wave of nausea. She had learned to breathe through it, counting her inhales, pressing her forehead to the cool bathroom tile. Her morning sickness didn't come on schedule, it came on emotion, and today, something in her gut twisted more than usual. When she stepped out, Julian was already in the kitchen with a glass of warm lemon honey water, a new ritual he'd adopted when he learned she was pregnant. You should get checked, he said, setting it down on the oak table. Just to be sure. Emily nodded, squeezing his hand. Julian was no longer the cold man she'd met 6 months ago. Now, he woke early to research prenatal diets, read parenting manuals instead of shareholder reports, and said, I love you without hesitation. She never doubted his love, but the world around them never stopped questioning. At the private clinic, Emily met with obstetrician Marla Quinn, once a trusted medical advisor to the Whitmore family. Her hair tied neatly back, voice always soothing, smile warm. The babies are strong, Dr. Quinn said after the ultrasound. 3 heartbeats, steady. You'd better start thinking of names. Emily laughed softly. He wants something tied to light. I leaned toward freedom. Both are beautiful, Doctor, Quinn replied, smiling before adding, I'll prepare your vitamins and supplements. I have a new sample today. As Emily left, a chill grazed her spine. Was it the nurse's glance, or the sense of being watched? She wasn't sure, but instinct, the same one she had once painted into canvases, never lied. That night, Julian received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a blurred photograph, but unmistakable. Dr. Quinn seated beside Nathan Whitmore, his younger brother, the one the family believed dead in an accident 10 years ago. Julian froze. Nathan, their father's favorite, the one who once said, I don't need morality, I need power, scrawled across the photo. Medical files aren't the only place where life is faked. Julian crushed the letter in his fist and called Noah Grayson. 1 day later, everything collapsed. Emily was drugged through the very ultrasound gel Dr. Quinn had applied. Not poisonous, but strong enough to paralyze. When she woke, her wrists were bound. Her body sprawled on the cold floor of a warehouse where yellow lights flickered like a fever dream. Nathan stepped from the shadows, no longer the fragile younger brother. His face bore the same angles as Julian's, but stripped of all warmth. "Sister-in-law," he whispered. "At last, we meet outside of photographs." Emily tried to sit, but the ropes cut deep. "He doesn't deserve it," Nathan said. "My brother. He's ruined Whitmore from within. I've come to take it back." She clenched her jaw. "Take it back by killing your own nieces and nephews?" Nathan smirked. "No, I don't kill. But if a price is needed for Julian to sign over control, I have ways." Behind him, Dr. Quinn appeared, syringe in hand. "Same compound," she said coldly, "but higher dose. Induces uterine contractions. Not fatal, just enough to lose the babies. Enough pain to make him sign." Emily tried to scream, but only her ragged breath filled the room. At the estate, Julian's phone rang. Nathan on video. The screen showed Emily bound, trembling on concrete. Dr. Quinn poised with the syringe. "You have 30 minutes, Nathan said. "Choose the company. Or your children." Julian didn't shout. He didn't slam the desk. He only rose, fists bleeding from how hard he clenched them, and turned to Noah. "We have GPS, don't we?" Noah nodded. Signal traced from the mic hidden in her coat. "Teams on standby." "Go," Julian said. Not another second. The rescue hit like a film reel. Strike team storming the warehouse. Flashlights blazing, rifles raised. Nathan pressed a gun to Emily's head. "Back off. One more step and I'll inject her." Julian walked forward, unarmed. "You've already won, Nathan. But only if you still have a life to spend." Nathan screamed. "I died 10 years ago because of you. I was the shadow. And now you want to steal it all again?" Julian kept walking, not challenging, pitying. "You were never the shadow. You were the choice. And you chose to become a monster." Sirens split the air. Agents surged. Nathan was tackled, disarmed. Dr. Quinn was restrained. Emily lifted onto a stretcher, eyes open but body drained. She gripped Julian's hand, whispering hoarsely, "The babies? Still alive?" He bent, kissed her forehead. "You are the strongest woman I've ever known. All 3 hearts are still beating, just like mine." Dawn in Westchester suburbs often came quietly, as though the light had learned to respect those who needed more time to heal. Emily woke in the private ward of Whitmore Medical Pavilion, the very project her father had once staked his life on, nearly destroyed by the family of the man she loved. On the monitor beside her bed, 3 tiny heartbeats pulsed steadily, not flawless, but resilient. Her hand pressed over her belly, more pronounced than ever. Doctors said she would need strict bed rest for at least a month. The risk of premature birth still lingered. But that didn't frighten her. She had survived worse. Betrayal in a white coat, the cold hand of a staged death, and threats from the bloodline she had married into. Julian was always there. He slept, slumped at the bedside, never gone for more than 10 minutes. Even as emergency board meetings, television interviews, and legal attacks from Nathan's loyalists rained down, he kept one hand clasped around hers. "What will their names be?" Emily asked one morning. When milk-pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, Julian didn't hesitate. Hope, Storm, and Phoenix. "Hope, Storm, Phoenix," she smiled weakly. "The first is what we found, the second is what we endured, and the third is what we became." Her fingers traced the rough stubble on his jaw, grown from nights without sleep. "You've changed," she whispered. His gaze softened. "I didn't change. I came back." The due date shattered under a violent storm in early spring. Wind screamed through the estate windows, trees cracking, power flickering across the neighborhood. Emily's water broke at 2:37 a.m., amidst thunder, as though the whole world trembled inside her. They didn't make it to the hospital. A White House-trained emergency team rushed to the estate, turning the grand living room into a field birthing ward, machines humming, lights glaring, antiseptic mixing with the scent of rain. Emily's body convulsed with pain sharp enough to tear through her. She clawed, screamed, laughed, then cried again, not from agony alone, but from the raw act of living. Julian never let go. Her grip bruised his hand purple, but he held on, whispering nothing, only staying. Hope was born at 3:12 a.m. A girl, dark-haired, pink-skinned, her cry like a declaration of existence. Storm followed. A boy, needing instruments, then roaring into the world, fierce as his name. Phoenix came last, and did not cry. The room froze. Emily nearly slipped into unconsciousness. Julian's knuckles whitened on the bedrail. The doctors worked swiftly. 15 seconds, then Phoenix cried. Not loud, thin as a needle, sharp as lightning. Julian bent his forehead against Emily's, tears spilling freely. Not from fear, but from something he finally dared admit. I'm crying, and I'm grateful for it. 3 months later, the Whitmore house no longer radiated cold power. Its walls carried Emily's sketches, not grand portraits, but small fragments. Julian cradling a baby, Phoenix sucking his hand, Storm yawning, Hope asleep with her fist curled in her mother's shirt. Whitmore Industries had been stripped of its old financial skeleton and rebuilt as a cooperative trust. Employees holding shares and public health funds tripled. Charlotte was sentenced to 7 years, Nathan 15. Dr. Quinn was stripped of her license for life. Frederick remained silent in prison, refusing counsel. Sometimes Emily still dreamed of the warehouse, but waking constantly brought her back to the chorus of 3 tiny cries, pulling her into a present where scars were not shame, but strength. One evening, they sat together on the second-floor balcony, their 3 children asleep side by side in the cradle. Emily rested her head on Julian's shoulder. "Could we have one more?" she asked softly. Julian chuckled. "What would you name this one? Thunder?" Emily closed her eyes. "No, Mercy." Julian kissed her forehead. "Because we've learned how to forgive even ourselves."